Hello and welcome back to IllumiNation, the Disney Lorcana podcast. My name is Max, and I am flying solo for this episode 46 of the podcast. Appreciate everybody tuning on in. Appreciate y'all being here. So before we get into the thick of things, I just wanted to first and foremost thank you for listening as always, and issue a little bit of an apology to everybody. We have been very, very pressed for time lately, and I know I mentioned this a couple episodes ago. I think this is the third episode in a row, unfortunately, that's going up a little less polished than what we would prefer it to be. So if this is your first time listening on in, please don't take it as this is the way it is. This is normally a two-person show that is edited. However, right now, we are just so pressed for time. We're in the thick of set championships. Hope everybody's enjoying set champ season and tons of other life stuff going on. So we haven't had the most time in the world to sit down and really give this a fine edit for everyone, just the really basics getting covered. So you might hear some ums, some uhs, some breathing sounds, a sniffle here or there. Apologies for any of that. That is not normally up to standard. We'd rather give you something than give you nothing when it comes to these episodes because we have a lot to talk about with Disney Lorcana. So we appreciate everybody bearing with us, and we appreciate your patience on that front. Moving on to a little bit of other news, just wanted to give a shout out to our new Disney Lorcana Challenge champion over in Bologna, Blurple, taking it down. Really, really cool to see. And I do want to give a little nod to the podcast here. We've been on a particular card that made its way into this Blurple list. We've been talking about this card quite a bit, if you know us in person or around the community. And we also mentioned it in the podcast in our last episode, a really deep dive into Blurple. We talked about the card Magical Maneuvers, and lo and behold, there was indeed a copy of Magical Maneuvers in the Champions DLC winning deck list. So I was really happy to see that. I do think this card is quite good. We've been using it all season long to pretty distinct and decisive effect, which, I mean, you have the advantage of this card is one of the rare cards that's good in the mirror, and you have the advantage of this card is good into the more aggressively slanted decks, which makes it pretty darn flexible. And for this current meta, it's rare to find a card that is really strong into multiple different strategies, especially in a non-proactive and linear deck. So just wanted to give a shout out to the team for that little piece of technology. I think it's a really excellent card, and I do think that Blurple takes advantage of it the best just because you have the most ink at any given time compared to the other Amethyst decks. So I do think that it is quite good. That being said, enough tooting of our own horns, we want to get into the episode proper. This episode, we want to talk about altering your hand. And we've done this already a little bit. We talked about it in a very macro sense. I think it's a good thing to revisit every now and again because strategies change, games evolve, metas change, and now we have a whole new core constructed format to discuss the concept of altering your hand. Altering your hand's gotten different since multiple sets ago, right? Since we had 8 sets in the format, now that we've shrunk down a bit for the beginning of this next season, whatever you want to call it, rotation of core constructed, we need to talk about altering your hand again. Altering your hand has gotten a lot more straightforward right now. And what do I mean by that? I think that it's gotten more straightforward in the fact that right now there are not, and this kind of is a good segue for Magical Maneuvers, there are not a lot of cards like Magical Maneuvers in the game right now that allow you the comfort to have a card that works early and works late. A good example of a card that did this previously would be something like Madam Mim Fox. Madam Mim Fox's stats plus rush made that card very, very strong in the early parts of the game. It also is very strong in the late game in tandem with a lot of the pieces that when they left play or came into play, an effect would happen. So your Merlin Rabbits, your Merlin Goats, things along those lines played very, very well to create game-winning late game draws out of Madam Mim Fox, as well as draws in the early part of the game that can get you back into the game. Card was relevant across the board at every point in the game, where we don't have a lot of those cards right now. We have cards that are good early. We have cards that are good late. We don't have a whole lot of cards that are good at various points in the game. So I think that makes altering your hand a little bit different. So I think it's worth touching on that topic. Obviously, it makes things a little bit more obvious, right? Like, I don't want my 8-drop Monstros, my 7-drop Hades, my 8-drop Elsas, things like that. We don't want those necessarily in our opening hand. But we do want our 1-drops. We want our 2-drops. We want our early game plays. It makes a lot of sense. We already talked a lot about specifically Blurple in the previous episode. Again, if you haven't had a chance to check out episode 45, give it a listen if you want to know about Blurple. We go over the deck itself in addition to the ways to give it the hardest of times if you're not a Blurple fan. So everything Blurple in that episode. But the first step of altering your hand for any deck is a question of deck construction and your deck's general game plan. How you built the deck should definitely influence how you are altering your hand. What do I mean by that? It's not as complex as what you may think, or it's not as nebulous as I made it sound. What I mean is there are a few key questions that really need answering when it comes to how the deck was built in relation to how should you mulligan. And I'll give some examples. First and foremost, what's the goal of the deck? What are we trying to do? Is it an aggressive deck that's trying to just drop as many things and go as wide as possible? A strategy that was punished previously before rotation, a strategy that now you can get away with a little bit more because there's so much less in the way of mass removal. Things that can wipe a board, things like Be Prepared, things like the Big Sisu. Right now we have Under the Sea, and that's pretty much the extent of what punishes somebody for going wide right now in the game. So what's your goal? Is it going wide? What's your curve look like? Is it all 1-drops? Is it just trying to go as wide and as low costed as possible? Or is it a little bit more like a Blurple deck where you are trying to get big things into play and always have the best character on the board? Is that what our goal is? Or another great question is, what is our uninkable count look like? A deck like the current iteration of Amber Steel, some of these lists are very greedy in playing upwards of 20 uninkables. Over 33% of the deck sometimes is not inkable. Now that's not that's something you absolutely can get away with. Why? Because you don't need that many cards to go to the inkwell over the course of a game. With Amber Steel, you only need 3 or 4 most of the time. Sometimes you want to get to 5, but for the most part, 4 is generally your curve topper, right? You're talking about Pluto Bodyguard. We're talking about an Unshifted Rhino. Those are the cards that really top out our curve. When our curve is that low and the bulk of our curve is 1 and 2, then it starts to decline around 3, and then we have a few selections at 4, one of which we don't even necessarily need to pay a full 4 ink for. That makes things look a little different. And then you start to add in other factors like the new 1-drop Aurora that gives us a discount for princesses. You start to add in Mulan, which starts to give us a little bit of hand filtering. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem that preposterous to run a high uninkable count. However, when it comes to altering your hand, these thoughts are very important. So if our goal is to, let's just continue on the Amber Steel example. If our goal is to end the game quickly and we're playing a high uninkable count and our curve is very low, those are the questions, right? What's our deck goal? What's the curve? What's our uninkable count look like? Our deck's goal is to end the game quickly. Our curve is extremely low and our uninkable count is very high. Okay. We know that now. What does that tell me as somebody who has to now go, okay, I don't play a lot of Amber Steel, but I need to figure out how to alter a hand when I'm starting to learn a deck? It's one of the first things we're going to do, right? No matter what. When you pick up Disney Lorcana, one of the first things you will do in a game, probably the first thing you do that's a decision point, because you're going to always take 7 cards, is you're going to make your alter. So that's the first thing I need to think about. When I'm talking about Amber Steel, when I look at a hand, I go, okay, do I have a game plan that fits what the deck's goal is? Do I have a curve of cards that let me do that? Obviously, the kind of ideal scenario is Aurora on 1, Tiana on 2, something like a Lady Family Dog on 3, play another character which will allow my Tiana to sing a Strength of a Raging Fire and just bury my opponent on board to the point where they will not be able to get back into the game. That is the general magical Christmas land that I want, right? That's what I want in a hand. However, I'm not going to be able to do that. So I can't just hard mulligan 7 cards and draw. Why? Well, because such a high percentage of my deck is uninkables. Let's just pretend that I have 7 inkable cards in my opening hand. But I need to ship all of them because none of them are the cards I just described, right? Well, now I have 53 cards, right? Because I'm going to alter all 7. I have 53 cards with 20 to 22 uninkables sitting in it. There is a significant chance that I can draw a hand that maybe not will be 7 uninkables, but will be enough uninkables, 5, 6 of them, that I will not be able to make decisions about how I resource in the game because my hand is glutted now with these uninkable cards. So very rarely will you see an Amber Steel player mulligan that aggressively. Typically, you'll see something like 3, 4 cards. 4 is kind of usually the upper echelon for altering in that particular deck. And it's because of that nature. Like, I need to keep pieces sometimes, right? So I might keep an Aurora. Maybe I haven't found the Tiana yet, but I'll keep an Aurora. I'll keep a Mulan because then I get at least Mulan for free. Maybe I can then find a Troubadour instead of a Tiana and run a version of that line just without Tiana instead. Not a bad idea. 4 drops are questionable, right? Rhino's inkable. Pluto's inkable. But do they impact the ability for me to actually curve out? And do I want to ink them, or would I rather draw them a little bit later? If I don't have a 1-drop Rhino, do I want to keep a 4-drop Rhino just because it's inkable? Those are the things you have to really start to learn, and this is why we hammer the point of play testing. Have other people look with you. Play when you're playing your opponent in a test game. Don't be afraid to show them and say, hey, here's my hand. What do you think I should do? Especially if they have experience on the deck, right? It just makes sense. So when I'm talking about deck construction, that is what I'm talking about. Its influence over the way you alter your hand, right? So just remember that. What's my deck's goal? What's my deck's curve? And what's the number of uninkables in my deck? Those are the 3 big questions that should start to allow you to understand how to alter a little bit better, at least initially. Blurple is kind of the opposite of Amber Steel in that there is a rule that I articulate when we're learning Blurple or I'm teaching somebody Blurple or something like that. The rule is very simple. It is no rampy, no keepy. That means that if I do not have a 2-drop ramp card, I am not keeping a single card in my hand. I am getting rid of all 7 because Blurple will fail to function if you do not have the 2-drop ramp cards. Not all the time. Not as much in every matchup, but the overwhelming majority of the time, you will get buried completely without your ramp. Why? Because of the deck construction, right? Like, that's important. I know that Blurple deck's only 3-drop is the card Into the Unknown, which is not a card I want to be playing on 3, unless I'm playing against Amber Steel. That is not a card I want to be playing, especially if I don't have one and I don't have a 2-drop ramp card. There's not many other 2-drops in my deck. Magical Maneuvers, kind of one of the only other ones. So maybe if we're playing Vision. So that means my 2-drops aren't there, which means I'm likely missing on 2, not playing anything, likely not playing anything on 3. Therefore, I went turn 1, maybe a 1-drop, maybe nothing, into turn 2, nothing, turn 3, nothing. In this meta, how am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to win a game when I've just done nothing for 2 straight turns in a row besides ink? That's crazy, right? And so for that reason, the uninkable count in Blurple is often extremely low. The greediest Blurple decks will play 13 or 14 uninkables. Most land around 10 to 12. And the reason for that is because of the simple rule, no rampy, no keepy. You can't just full mulligan when you're playing 20 uninkables because you might get punished. So you need to mitigate that in your deck construction. So these are definitely things to think about when you're altering your hand. Then you get more complexities that start to be added into this little puzzle. Play versus draw. What are you on? What is better? A lot of people in an Amber Steel world really like the Troubadour on the draw because the Troubadour lets you do the line of singing your strength fast. Now, this Aurora Tiana thing, kind of like the Shift Rhino line, is good on both sides of the coin because it lets you do all of this playing and singing. Rhino being the weakest of it because you're not adding the most bodies to the board to increase the potency of your Strength of a Raging Fire. So that's why it's the least desirable of the 1-2 lines in the deck. But they're always interested in fast singing a Strength of a Raging Fire because it's something that sets the opponent back and allows you to stay ahead and squeeze more lore out of your units, which is what you need from your characters to win the game. Similarly, in Blurple, not a whole lot changes play draw. On the play, generally, I get to skip playing a 1-drop, which is nice because then if I end up drawing that same 1-drop, or I end up finding out my opponent's on the mirror and now I don't have to play that Rafiki, that's great. I can resource it and not feel bad about it. But if I don't play it and I'm holding Sail, I can then play Sail and then use the extra ink to play my 1-drop, and I didn't lose a step. So I didn't lose anything by not playing a character on my first turn. So there are definitely advantages on the play versus the draw that will heavily, either minorly or heavily, impact how you should alter, right? There are some decks that completely change tactics when they're on the play or the draw. Amethyst Steel likes to often lead on a Diablo into a 2-drop of choice on the play. Some versions will play something like a Timothy Q. Mouse into a Genie 3-drop, which then allows them to start questing very aggressively. On the draw, they might not be able to get on the front foot as easily as the play, so they'll do something like play Diablo into Calhoun and kind of dare you to come after their Diablo, because Calhoun will just basically take out almost anything that's coming after the Diablo. Whether you know or don't know what your opponent is on will heavily impact how you alter right now. The reason for that is because if you're not on a very proactive deck, like we discussed a moment ago, there are cards that are very specific choices that are in the deck to help make sure that the deck can overcome other things. So there are cards like in Blurple, Monstro is a card that is a great choice against the Emerald Sapphire decks because it just chews through all of their large statted characters. It can't fall victim to the combo of Heads Held High Under the Sea. So it's a very desirable card in that matchup. It's not always good, though. There are other cards in other decks that are put in there specifically to deal with other decks, right? They're kind of the silver bullets. These are what I need to really help me overcome that particular deck. If it's in your hand and you know it's there, then you can keep it. In Blurple, Madam Mim Elephant is a good example of this. Against an aggressive deck, I know I can keep this card and it'll really help me overcome those aggressive decks. Maybe not as good in something like a mirror match because I want that later to pick up my Hades after it's on the board so I can Hades again. So it changes the when I want that to see that card if I know what my opponent has. If I don't, I probably just keep one. Worst case scenarios, I have to ink it. So that's the concept. The last thing to talk about is kind of how do you feel when the altar goes badly? We all feel bad, and this is kind of the note I want to end on because I think it's kind of the most encouraging part is there's only so much you can do. If the choice of the altar is correct, the choice of the altar is correct. It does not matter what the result of the altar is as much. It's about the choices we make, not what the variance or the random generation gives us back, right? I may alter 2 cards and draw those same exact 2 cards. It does not mean that I was wrong to alter them. It does not mean that I should have altered more cards. So if the alter goes badly, it's very important to then double down and go, did I do what I was supposed to do when it comes to the altar? And it's easy to second guess ourselves. It's easy to have played out a whole game and be results oriented. It's like, had I just altered 2 more cards, I would have gone 2 cards deeper in my deck, or I would have had 2 less cards and I would have 2 more looks at something I really needed. All those kinds of things are true, but out of your control. What's in your control is going, okay, did I make the hand function the way it's supposed to? Did I give myself the opportunity to find the critical pieces I need in order to stay in a game? And that's why something like Blurple has to hard mulligan so much, and why something like an Amber Steel can't mulligan too crazily or too wildly or too egregiously. So those are things to keep in mind. Altars will absolutely go bad. This is a card game. There's 60 cards in your deck. You can't control what cards are going to come at any given time. That's part of the reason why the meta is so difficult right now. I've talked to a lot of very experienced and very talented Lorcana players who just feel like they're doing something wrong. There's this inherent feeling of like, I can't convert as much as I was previously. And I think personally, a lot of that comes down to the concept that variance is more obvious right now because we don't have those cards, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, that transcend they're good early and they're good late. There's so precious few right now that fit the bill of that description. And that's why we're building whole decks around some of these cards. That's why you see these cards consistently all the time. That's why early in the meta we saw a big jump up in Amethyst and Steel, and that truthfully hasn't changed too much. There's obviously some other contenders in here now, and it's taken longer for those decks to develop a strategy, and I still think there's refinement that might need to be done on some of them. So there's a lot of opportunity for the game to still refine. We're seeing the Amber Emerald Dog deck, or Sea Dogs, or whatever you want to call it, start to be popular. Some don't play Under the Sea, some do. Some play the Emerald Chromicon, some don't. We're starting to see the evolution of the Emerald Sapphire decks now, right? Like some are shifting Baymax, some aren't. Some are playing Pleakley, some aren't. So it's all about trying to learn what the potent strategies are in the meta, and the more and more that we evolve and change things, the more that taking your time when it comes to the altar and understanding your deck's construction, again, just to hammer it home, the goal, the curve, the uninkable count will help you immeasurably when it comes time for you to keep questing.